The first group of witnesses that testified, the first 4 or 5 were first responders to the scene. And there's really no dispute as to what they saw. They all described a horrible crime scene. And it was a horrible crime scene. What happened out there was terrible. But they said they thought everybody in that house was dead. Which corroborates exactly what Jesse Dotson said. We're going to talk a lot about corroboration and what has been corroborated and what has not been corroborated. The crime scene was so bad, it appeared everybody was dead. This is trained medical professionals. They said that the front door was wide open and that there was an odor coming from the house, which is bad. But think about what Erica Smith said. She's at the house, the door is open, there's an odor and her child's in there. And she doesn't do anything. We'll talk about Erica Smith a little bit more. But think about what the first responders said, what that crime scene appeared like. They talked about how emotional that scene was and how hard it was, and it was. And that affects people. It affected officers in this case. The next witness was Sergeant Tony Mullins, who was basically in charge of the crime scene. He's investigated over 600 or 700 homicides. And you know, one of the first things Mr. Lapone asked him was about, this isn't like CSI, this isn't like TV. And the reason they asked that, because they knew none of the physical evidence matches their theory. If it had all matched their theory, they would have said, isn't this just like CSI? Isn't this just like on TV, how they match it up? But they know you're a smart jury, and they know that the physical evidence doesn't match what they're saying happened. So they just start discrediting scientific evidence from the beginning. Scientific evidence puts people in prison every day in this country. It is extremely important. It ranks right up there with mathematical evidence. I asked Officer Mullins about the shotgun that was in the house, the loaded shotgun sitting by the bed. You know, it's pretty consistent with maybe somebody that's afraid somebody's going to come over to his house, afraid somebody's looking for him. Because he kept a loaded shotgun with small children in a house. Ballistics. He talked about the ballistics that were found, the bullets. And we know that they matched up to at least 2 different guns, a 9mm and a .380. And although Mr. Henderson has told you all these guns came from inside of the house, that's not what the proof showed. Proof showed there was some bullets on one of the tables that matched one of these guns. He introduced a lot of exhibits and a lot of pictures. 468 exhibits, I think, was the number in this case. Hundreds of things were taken out of that house and tested. And Sergeant Mullins was the officer that they used to introduce quite a bit of that stuff. But you know what? Not one piece of physical evidence from that house can be matched to Jesse Dotson. Not one. We talked about blood spatter all over the walls. What that tells you, this was an extremely violent case. Yet no DNA is left by Jesse Dotson. They took knives, knife handles, blood, furniture, pieces of furniture, pillows, beads, boards, nothing matches the defendant. Although we're going to talk in a minute about it matched people. DNA did. We just don't know who those people are. It was important for the police and for the state to point out the hairs that were found on the crime scene. We requested they be tested a year and a half later because they never had them. Hairs on the victim had never been tested. So we requested it. The pictures, the hairs on Shindry Roberson's back, for some reason nobody ever took a picture of those. Because it didn't match their theory. I want to talk a little bit about staged. Now, testimony continually come out from the police that this scene was staged. Is there anything indicating that outside of the police saying it was staged? What evidence do we have of that? What information do we have of that it was staged? Nothing. They just say that's what happened. Sergeant Mullins was able to talk a little bit about gang hierarchy, how gangs work, how they have leaders. But he didn't seem to know a lot about it. The next witness was an FBI agent, 2 FBI agents. They're right. What they basically told you is, we were given a bunch of hairs. Remember, they had Q2.1, 2.3, 2.2, Q5. Q5 was a hair. You see the picture of it. It's in evidence. Q5 was a hair that was taken, clutched in Marissa Williams' hand. A woman who had been murdered, the hair was clutched in her hands. They never requested it be tested. We did. And then the FBI comes in and tells you, we looked at it, yeah, it was hair. We didn't test it any further. We didn't think it was important. They didn't tell us that. Because as I told you, we don't talk to defense lawyers. We have to request it, but they won't talk to us. We can't tell them what we want. They don't send us anything. A week before trial, we get their notes. Because we just don't talk to you. We didn't test that hair clutched in the murder victim's hands because we didn't think it was important. So they told us what happened. What in the world do you want this hair tested for? They were able to test the hairs on the back, an Asian and a Caucasian. And they explained how that comes through, mitochondrial DNA comes through the mother's line. So somewhere down the line, if there is Asian and Caucasian blood in whoever left those hair. But police said that hair wasn't important. Although it's in blood, time stamped on her back. It's not important because it doesn't fit our theory. They said that. It's not important. We didn't even send it off to be tested. We don't care whose hair it is. This is how innocent people end up in prison. apparently they've never even run this hair through their computers. They have that CODIS, I think it's called, where they run hair and DNA to see if it matches up with anybody that's committed other crimes or anything, because they have a database. They've never even done that because it's not important. What we know is that evidence doesn't match up to the defendant. It doesn't match up to anybody in the house. And they're too lazy or too arrogant to test it. How dare you challenge our theory? We told you what happened. How dare you want to test scientific evidence? Ladies and gentlemen, that's what creates reasonable doubt. When you have unidentified hair on one of the victims, and then you try to find out whose it is. All night it's flown there through the air. Could have been when her clothes were altered. You're right, it could have been when her clothes were altered. Could have come off the person who did it. Special Agent James from the TBI. He said on March 13th, a week after Jesse Dotson was arrested, Tony, who was Officer Mullins, told him, we think it's a sexual assault. This is after Jesse Dotson's been arrested. We think it's a sexual assault, and it should be fined. Found semen in one of the children's mouths. But he told you that's not really important. That doesn't mean anything. Could have gone from anywhere. Could have. Could have come from the person who did it also. Don't know. Because they didn't follow up on it. They didn't do anything about it. Tony told me that we, the police, think that one of the children was wearing beads. And when the perpetrator either struck him or grabbed his hair, we think some of his DNA may have been on those beads. So will you test the beads? And he did. And this is important because he found unidentified DNA of a man on those beads. If it had been Jesse Dotson's, the theory would have been case over. This is so important. But when it belongs to somebody that we don't know who it is, it's not important at all. It means nothing. It means nothing that the person that may have done this could have grabbed him by the hair or hit him to transfer DNA. Detached DNA he talked about that's so hard to find, that he found. I'm not making this stuff up. But again, even Officer James told you that's just not important. Doesn't fit our theory. What's that matter? What do we care? Why would we want to run it through our system, see whose DNA it is? Could go from anywhere. Could have. Could have also come from somebody that was holding that boy. Because it's man-made beads, if you look at the autopsy photos. It's the same beads he had in his hair. And if you look at that child, he's the most beautiful child you've ever seen. And what better way to do something than to hold that child? To try to get information. Did that happen? I don't know. It's a reasonable theory that should have been investigated. When you have DNA, they should have at least made a step to try to find out whose DNA that is. Because 20 years from now, when they hook it up, and they go talk to that person in prison, and he admits doing it, this is going to be another article that we all see, where the governor of the state stands up and says to the person who has done 20 years in jail for something he didn't do, sorry. I wish we'd looked at that back in 2010. We didn't. We did not. Well, they do know. They don't want to do it. I don't have a database in my office. They do. Talk about how well blood transfers. And I apologize for my voice. But how well blood transfers, it's sticky. When you have blood on you and you touch something, it's sticky. It transfers really well. Which is so important because you know they tore that bicycle apart. Trying to find one scintilla of DNA that belongs to either one of the adults or one of the children in the house. Because the theory behind that is that the people who did this, when they're casting blood, because it's so violent, and there's blood all over the house, and they're moving around the house, and then they're moving 9 bodies who were bloody. The theory I assume behind it was the people responsible are going to get some blood on their body someplace, and they're going to transfer it when they leave to whatever means they leave by. That's why that bike was so important. And that's why it is so critical. That you understand that no blood of anybody was found on that bike. It's something they don't like because it doesn't fit their theory. But ladies and gentlemen, that's the truth. If Jesse Dodson had done all of this, removed all of these bodies, there's no way he does that without getting blood on him and then transfers that blood to that bicycle. You know it, and I know it. It's impossible. It is another element that creates reasonable doubt. Scientific evidence is as close to mathematical evidence as you can get. It doesn't lie. It's not like this. It's just much more evidence that doesn't match Jesse Dodson. It's trace evidence, it's regular evidence, it's DNA. And again, this is the type of evidence when it is corroborated, puts people in prison every day. It's also the type of evidence that 20 years later frees people from prison when somebody actually takes the time to look at it and figure it out. Agent Braswell from the TBI testified that at least 2 different guns were used to shoot the victims. We're going to talk about it a little bit more. Let's think about that. One person, at least 2 different guns. Case coordinator Davidson was the next witness for the state, and this case was very emotional. And I'm not making light of anybody. But ladies and gentlemen, you can get so passionate and so emotional about a case that it affects your judgment and it affects your focus. When you combine that with exhaustion, working around the clock, it leads to mistakes. Let's look at some of the comments the case officer made. These are quotes. Nothing on the crime scene is inconsistent with what we say happened. None of the DNA that matches other people is inconsistent, is what he's saying. Because they say it doesn't matter. When they're not answering something, they say that's not important. DNA of other people and fingernails is not important. I've never seen a case solved with DNA. I've never had a stabbing case. It's not my job to exonerate people. That should scare you. When it's the police department's attitude, it's not my job to exonerate anybody. It's not our job to look at everything. Because every piece of physical evidence that didn't match Jesse Dotson, the answer is just, that's not important. It wouldn't match other people. That's just not important. Well, you're going to tell us whether or not it's important. Investigating a case like this, when you have information coming from various people that one of the victims, Cecil Dotson, was robbing people, what you do is you call that person a knucklehead. You call that person a crackpot. You don't take a statement from them. You don't even bother to look on the computer and see that Cecil Dotson has pending aggravated robbery cases to possibly corroborate these people's statements. You just dismiss it because it doesn't match your theory. That's what happened in this case. When you have a child, for the very first time, he is questioned. And Dr. Mulbauer tested this child was square. He was able to understand. He was able to communicate. Well, the very first time the child's interviewed, and he's asked an open-ended question, what happened? He says there's a knock on the door. People come in. It's fighting. A man named Roderick. Sandra was there. My daddy never shut open that door. You come in and you tell the jury that the kid was wild out of his head. Well, there's no medical proof of that. Nobody said anything to that effect. But if a witness says something you don't like, you call them a crackpot, you call them a name, or you just say that they were crazy at that time. They were all weirded out. There's no proof of that. But he just said it because he didn't like it. Another witness comes down. You ask him questions. Again, you don't write any of this down or anything, but you don't like what he has to say. So you send him home and you tell his mother when he gets ready to tell us what we want to hear. Bring him back here. Is that objective police work? Wouldn't you have loved to know what that witness said? We don't, because there's no record of it. You think if he implicated Jesse Dotson, you'd have heard from him? Sure you would. You're beginning to see a pattern here of how this investigation is handled. We talked about different ways for this officers to take statements. And again, I'll use my favorite court reporter, Catherine, as an example. She has typed down every word that's been said in these courts for over 3 weeks. How difficult is that when you are interviewing somebody about a mass murder? To have somebody in there typing it all up. Or to have a tape recorder and record the entire event. Or to have a video camera and record the entire event. Not only do that, but preserve the tape. There's a reason they don't record it all, but they preserve it. Because it's easier than just to come in here and tell you what the person said. We teach our children to believe police officers. But instead of actually keeping a tape of a witness's entire statement, what possible purpose could we have to destroy that? And destroy all our notes? And they come in here and said, this witness stand and said, oh, I'll just tell you what he said. In a case where you heard officers testify, there was tremendous pressure to solve. What did these witnesses say that was so bad that they didn't want you to hear? This isn't some defense trick. It's nothing some shady defense lawyer is doing. We're just asking them to document what happens entirely when you talk to somebody. And when you have documented it entirely, don't destroy it. Because that raises the suspicion that it might not have gone down exactly the way you're telling us. Would you be comfortable giving a statement to the police in an important case and having them destroy the entire thing? And just commit and say, I'll tell the jury what you said, don't worry about it. Final couple questions with this officer, the case coordinator dealt with. The defense asking you to send things off. The response basically was, that's not my job. I don't have to do your guys' case for you. Not our responsibility. No, we didn't take pictures of your client's hands. We didn't have any cuts on them. Of course, we didn't take any pictures of this. Ladies and gentlemen, all of these things create reasonable doubt. Because we're not left with. Next couple witnesses dealt with Corpus, and they were victims' family members, talking about how people died. Sometimes in murder cases, we lose focus of the victims. It's horrible what happened to these people. And it's hard not to be sympathetic as to what happened to these people. The young boy's grandmother, Ida Anderson, testified about her daughter dying. Now she has communication with these children, and she seems to be a great person. But it makes you wonder how much communication she's had with them regarding the events, and how many things that the boys said they heard from their grandmother. Because at one point in the interview that they took at the hospital, or took 5 months after being in the hospital, they asked one of the young men, "How do you know this?" And the response was, "Because my granny said so," which is fine. It's good that you talk about things and try to heal. But did these boys really remember it from it happening, or because it's what they heard their grandmother talking about? Mr. Dotson, who was Jesse and Cecil's father, lost a son, lost grandsons. Jimmy never told you about that. He talked about how his boys got along. And he told you that his family, he lived with Cecil Dotson for a while, and that his family members were so concerned for his safety over there, they thought he would get killed over there. That's horrible. It was so dangerous at Cecil's house that his father's family didn't want him living there. They were afraid he would be killed. William Wardell, Cecil and Jesse's younger brother, goes by the nickname of Fat. He was scared to death in there. You tell him when you looked at him. Who was he afraid of? I think a reasonable answer is that is to the people that are still out on the streets. The people that he was afraid of before any of this ever happened that he talked about. A guy named Doc Holliday, who we never saw. He's definitely afraid. So afraid he couldn't remember some things he said to the police that had to do with these individuals. I probably wouldn't have remembered them either if they still lived in my neighborhood. He said that out of the scene in a conversation with Frank, Willie Boyd Hill, who told him that the people in the house had been tortured. I guess we've got to wonder, where did Frank get this information? How did he know this? Remember, another witness said that originally when they were out at the scene, people thought they died of a gas leak. Did Frank say that they'd been tortured? Willie Boyd Hill. You know, we talked about important decisions in our lives and how we make them. Whose judgment we rely on, maybe a parent or a sibling or a spouse. Would any of you feel comfortable with a major important decision in your life being made by Willie Boyd Hill? Would any of you trust your children with him? We know he's the convicted felon that happens through the local gun dealer, convicted drug dealer. Apparently it's the place to go when you need a gun, his apartment, where he hangs and eats off of his children's welfare checks. He talked about the Valentine's Day fight where they're all out at Fire and Ice, and Cecil ran his girlfriend's car into a tree, and the police ended up getting called to the house. Cecil said this, they're selling dope and you're going to get dope. But he said in the gang that wasn't a big deal. It wasn't. And I guess we all believe him because he's under oath. He said that wasn't a big deal. Snitching on a fellow gang member. And we couldn't really remember a lot about the gang that he's a member of. Seemed confused with the whole coordinated robbery series. And we reminded him of staying with her name. Oh yeah, now I remember. Doc Holliday is the governor. And a guy named Dredd is the chief of security. And yeah, I did talk to them about Cecil, the way he was acting, things he was doing. And they actually called me over to an apartment. There was 4 or 5 other gang members there, but it's not a gang meeting. They just giving their information about what Cecil had done to the higher-ups in the gang, but it wasn't a gang meeting. And, they were discussing what they were going to do, but it wasn't a gang meeting. It's exactly what it was. One of them said something got to be done about this. But then he told you all of the confusion was about a drywall incident at the apartment. All of this, everything was about a botched drywall from a hole in a wall. At the crime scene, he told you. He called Markel Vester, who was Cato. And said, y'all went too far. There's only one interpretation for that comment. Y'all went too far. But it doesn't fit the state's theory. It does fit the physical evidence. That's corroboration. It's funny when you get gang members in a courtroom, everybody seems to be retired, out of the loop. He almost made it sound like being in a gang wasn't a bad thing. Gangs owners. Yeah, we have all our guns. We have plenty of ammunition. Yeah, we wouldn't do a hit like this. We wouldn't bring kitchen knives. We'd all have enough guns. Sound like he was familiar with things like that happened. Yeah, take my word for it. Gangs don't do things like this. Yes, they do. Stacy Young told us that she saw the brothers. They weren't fighting. They were okay. Erica Smith was the next witness to testify. Erica Smith lost a child in that house. And that's very difficult. In her answer of I was outside of that house and I thought, there was something wrong inside of that house and my child was in it. And I didn't want to go in there. Maybe that is the truth. Maybe she didn't. I don't assume it's hard to believe. Unless maybe she already knew what was going to happen. I don't know. But she was under oath, and I asked her several different ways. Are you sure? This conversation that you said you had with Cecil on the phone. And Jesse was mad in the background yelling, really happened. Because Erica, up till today, You've never said that. Anybody. And that's pretty damning proof. Wow. Come in here and drop this on us. Are you sure? And I asked her, you know phones have records. Yeah, no, it happened. Use your cell phone, right? Yeah. Don't seize your cell phone, yeah. Yeah. And a little while later, cell phone records come in. And these are them, and you'll have time to look at them in the back. But the calls that are made from her aren't answered. They have phone records that can tell us whether or not the phone is answered. And Charity Wright told us those calls were not answered by a human. We're positive of it. Scientific evidence. It doesn't lie. Which begs the question, why in the world would Erica Smith come in here and say that? When she's never said it before. Two and a half years ago, when Jesse Dotson was arrested, and she was interviewed, would you think that might be something she would have told the police? But she didn't, because it wasn't true. And we can see from the phone records, it's not true. It didn't happen. But the problem with that in a jury trial is, once it's in your mind, boy, that's hard to get out. Even though you've seen proof that it never happened, it's hard to get out of the back of your mind. Well, wow. Right before this happened, this person said they had a phone call with CSUN. Jesse, the same guy who's on trial, was screaming in the background all mad. It's hard to get out of our mind. We start thinking, man, maybe she's another phone. Maybe something else happened. We try to justify it. But we can't. Because proof shows us it never happened. Why did she do it? I don't know. She was quick to tell us also, oh, that argument in the past between Doc and Cecil and Frank and all the gang problems, that was all over the drywall problem at the apartment, Doc's apartment, you know. Cecil did a little drywall work and it wasn't up to Doc's satisfaction. That's what caused all of her stuff. She told that. It wasn't even really in response to a question. It was almost as if maybe she'd been talking to some other witnesses as to what they said. That's something that is staged. Nicole Dotson talked about the gang members who are her brothers. The phone call, when her phone rang, it came from inside of her apartment. The same thing that Officer Davidson said. Officer Davidson never told us, we don't think that really happened. There's absolutely no evidence of that. That it didn't happen. There's no phone people to say it didn't happen. The phone records indicate it did happen. That somebody is in her apartment making a call to her cell phone. And there's a man on the phone and he's jacking around with her. But it's easier just to say, that's not what we think happened. Same thing as her mother's door being kicked in, which happened. And the officer told you that we think it was gang members. She told you her brother Jesse said they're going to put this on me. Just bury me with my brother. He was paranoid. He indicated he wished he died of his brother. He was upset. This is the day before he interviewed with. It was the day before he put the gun to his head. And 2 days before he talked to the police. And that's the picture she said she took of her brothers. That's when I asked her about Jesse making the comment, I should have died with him. Sharonda Lane is probably the most neutral person who testified in this trial. She's not family. She's not law enforcement. She's not a girlfriend of Jesse's. She's just a family friend. It's all about the family. And she talked about Jesse being very emotional, being very upset, putting a gun to his head because they're showing his picture on TV. This is about March 5th. They're showing his photo on TV, on all of the news channels. He puts a gun to his head, and although you were told in opening by the state, he put a gun to his head and said, I'm not going to jail. What she told you was, the entire story, put a gun to his head and said, I'm not going to go to jail for something I didn't do. He was that upset. Caroline Mason is the one who recorded all of the children, that recorded CJ in all of his interviews. Told us how important it is to take everything and preserve everything. And you know what? Caroline Mason did it right. She recorded the entire interviews with the children, and she preserved them. And that way, we are able to know everything CJ said. That's the right way to do it. And because she did that, we know the first thing CJ said is that somebody else had done this. And after being led by an investigator, their uncle did it. But you know what? If we hadn't had those tapes, if those tapes had been wiped out and erased, you know what you would have heard? Oh yeah, CJ said that he did it. Jesse did it. Did he ever say anything else? No. Nothing. That's all he ever said. Trust me. On that. Yeah, we erased all the tapes, but that's all he ever said. Luckily, they preserved it. She told you when she was interviewing Jesse, she told him it was like putting together a puzzle, and that's what this case is like. It's like putting together a couple puzzles, and all the pieces are mixed up. You got to put it together perfectly to get past beyond a reasonable doubt. Which can't happen. Because there's too many pieces that don't fit. Charity writes, she told us about the phone call that wasn't answered. If you look at the records, she told us something else too. If you look at the purple up top, and it looks like it's at about 38 minutes after Now you look at those records when you get back there. But it was a call from 859-0354, which is Cecil Dotson's cell phone. And it was made to 282-3264. And it was made at about 12:38. There was another one at 12:39. If I'm reading the records correctly, it was answered. And if I'm reading the records correct, it was the last phone call Cecil Dotson ever made himself. Why is that important? Well, 282-3264 is Cato. Or Bill Vester, who kind of seems to be the chief of staff for Doc Holliday. But you know what Cato said? Cato said that phone call was never made. Why would Cato say that? We talked about the young boys that testified. And you know, everybody's been right, they are brave. And thank God they're alive. And they've been brave and they've been heroic. And they seem to be really good kids. And CJ testified and said Uncle Junior did. And then when Mr. McAfee cross-examined him about other people coming into the house and there was a fight, he said, yes, sir. If that's not reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what is. Because what he said was other people did this. And Mr. McAfee wasn't mouthing the words to him when he interviewed him, when he questioned him. And Mr. McAfee wasn't standing behind anybody else questioning to him, nodding or shaking his head. And the garbage bag that CJ talked about, any taped interviews, never said anything about that. But after rehearsal, that's what he said. Do I think the boy's lying? No, I don't. I don't think he thinks he's lying. I think he truly believes that. But I think he's mistaken. For those of you that have children, and they're about that age, ask them to try to remember something from a couple of years ago. When Mr. Henderson was questioning CJ, something that struck me, he said, I looked in there, and he had said various times different things about whether or not he saw somebody shoot his father. And I don't think he really knows. That's what he doesn't really know. But when Mr. Henderson was talking to him, he said, I looked in there, and before he shot my daddy, there was a body laying on the floor beside him. Which, if what he's saying is accurate, that would indicate that Hollis Seals was killed before Cecil Dotson. Which doesn't jive with anything the state has ever told you. The first interview he gave, CJ on tape, when they asked him questions, and he identified other people as doing this, he corrected the interview. He explained to her how the tape worked, how the tape recorder worked, which tells you he knew what he was doing and what he was talking about. Even though they try to say now he was just out of it, he was crazy. They say that because they don't like what it's said. he made the statement, during that first statement that is recorded, douche, douche, douche. You'll never stop playing with the Game Boy. Mr. McAfee asked him, douche, 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 is the sound of gunshots, right? And he said, yes. You never stop playing with the Game Boy is what the person said in that room, right? He said, yes. Because that's when they talked about him reliving it. His breath would get short. That is the reliable testimony as to what happened. That's what he said happened. But as the expert told us, when you ask a child something, he gives you an answer. Like he did, other people did this. Douche, 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 never stop playing with the Game Boy. And an adult, and you continue to ask the child the same question. They think their first answer is wrong. So then they start giving you different answers. And then when they give you an answer, you like, and you start praising them, then they think they've done it correct. That's exactly what happened in this case. At one point in the interview, several points in the interview, young CJ makes some statements as to what happened. And he's asked by the interview, how do you know that? And he says, because my granny told me. That is contamination. And there's nothing wrong. I'm not using contamination as a bad word. But this interview that they're relying on was taken months later. After he'd been with family and they discussed what they thought happened. So factually, he's giving answers to, that's what my granny told me. That's where his memory is coming from. Cedric, Mr. Anderson told you, yeah, he got up here and told you. He did. He was irresponsible to put that child on the witness stand. He doesn't remember his uncle. He calls him Uncle Jesse. Nobody has ever called Jesse Dotson Jesse. His name is Junior, and that's what he's always gone by. The child didn't even know him well enough to know his name. Mr. Anderson asked, do you remember him? Did he stab you? Yeah. That's it. I don't anything further. I didn't want to definitely question that child. You go over a statement he gave to the police talking about Raven, the Disney actress, being at the house. Talking about Nucci from the Big House TV show being at the house. Talking about sneaking up behind his uncle, flying off on his bicycle. But I had to. That's what we do. Because they put him on the witness stand after they knew his statement to the police indicated he actually had no recollection of what happened. The desperate times call for desperate measures. So they put up a small child to say, do you remember who did it? Yeah, Uncle Jesse did. I remember. That's desperation. That's what you do when you know your case is absolutely falling apart. Does anybody need a break? Everybody all right?
Need a break? All right, let's take a 10-minute recess.
Interview he had with Jesse Dotson. And what he basically has, what he generated from this interview was a supplement where he basically wrote, Jesse told me he shot him, Jesse told me he stabbed him. And then he comes in and he tells you about all this corroboration that Jesse told him, which of course isn't in his supplement. That entire interview was videotaped. And as Jesse Dotson told you when he testified, why didn't they keep the entire interview of him? This is a mass murder charge. Why didn't they keep it? What is it on that tape that they don't want you to see? Mr. Anderson was talking about all the things Jesse Dotson didn't tell the police. We don't know that because the 5 hours of the interview are gone. It's easier for the police just to come in here and tell you what they want. That should raise some suspicion. When you have a guy that is handcuffed to a chair for 6 or 7 hours, who the day before had attempted suicide, although Armstrong had no idea of that. He said, I didn't know that. How do these guys communicate, these police officers? Do they talk to each other? Most people, when they get to that mental state, would be taken to a mental hospital. Except if you're a suspect in a murder case. Then you are brought down here to this building, you are handcuffed to a chair or to a table. You have somebody scream at you, as he said he did. You have somebody pound on the table, as he said he did. You have them talk about religion, heaven and hell, to a man who is despondent, a man who is depressed. And when he asked the question finally, what do you want me to say? They're all dead. He says, I want you to say this, this, and this. And he does. And if you don't believe police act like that, then you don't read the papers. Because that's how people who confess to cases and hear only the police side of it end up in prison for 20 years before they're finally released. It happens. All of this corroboration. What corroboration? Did we hear about boards? Bodies being moved? Clothing? The order in which the people died? Staging? The pillow? The pants? What about this cocaine? Where did that come from? Every witness who saw these individuals this evening, nobody said anything about buying some cocaine. Nobody. Which makes you think that the people who came in there brought it with them. Because somebody wouldn't say, they're being truthful about the marijuana, but not about the cocaine. Nobody ever indicated anything about any cocaine. Yet it shows up stuffed up in the vagina of one of the women as a message. As all of the officers keep saying, they're trying to make it look like a gang hit. They're trying to make it look like a gang hit. Well, you know what? Maybe it was. Remember, it's the defense. We don't have to prove anything. What gang did it? Who did it? I don't know. But all these officers talked about the major drug dealer, Greg Petty's just been caught. Somebody snitched on him. About Eric Dion Brown, the gang leader who had just been murdered. About an individual who lived with Cecil Dotson's cousin. Yet remarkably, the officers who testified in this case, some of them, the first time they ever heard about that was when they're sitting up here. They were unable to make that connection because they didn't look for it. They didn't do anything. Nothing. But they keep talking about Jesse Dawson corroborated all of this. Jesse Dawson corroborated all of this. And if I say it enough times and I say it loud enough and I yell it at you, maybe you'll believe it. He corroborated it all. He corroborated it all. Where? Where's all the information about staging, about pants, about cocaine, putting shells in a bag? Nothing is typed up. Just trust me, this is what happened. That's what they're selling you. No, we don't have any records of it. Everything that happened, no. What we did. There's just no explanation for that. It is their burden to prove it. As jurors, we cannot justify that for the government. We cannot excuse that for the government. We cannot excuse their lack of proof. We cannot err on the side of the government. Sure, they don't have all these things, but they said they did, and that's okay. That is not what this system is built on. And as hard as it is to acquit somebody, that is what the law says you must do. Because they didn't bring it. We talked a little bit about the mother, Priscilla Shaw. And you know what's really interesting? We talked about the burden on them and how they've got to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt what happened. By that same token, they've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it didn't happen another way. But if you look at what these two witnesses say, Priscilla says, Jesse told me to cease to set the gun down. And you just started shooting. Is that what happened? Because what Lieutenant Armstrong, that Deputy Director Armstrong said is, Jesse said Cecil was reaching for the gun. Shot him. And he just started shooting. Ladies and gentlemen, those are polar opposites of each other. It's not the same thing. So which is it? The government cannot throw a bunch of stuff at you. May happen this way, may happen that way, may happen this way. Maybe this happened, maybe that happened, maybe that happened. Just agree with me that he did it. That's not the way it works. And that's what they did with those two. They must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt, to a moral certainty, what happened. Priscilla Shaw said, Cecil set down the gun. Jesse started shooting. That is much different than Cecil was grabbing the shotgun and he started shooting. They're not the same. When you talk to a man who is despondent or who is suicidal, whose family has been murdered, and he hasn't slept in 4 days, and you scream at him when he is changing a chair, and you call him a motherfucker, and you call him a bastard, and you call him a cold-hearted killer, and you tell him you're going to put him on the 4th floor of this building where the gangster asylums are housed, and you threaten him, and you beat him down to the point of where he cries, as if he is defeated, which is what they testify. And you tell them what you need them to say. That is what you get. There is a term for it in the world of psychology. It's called a false confession. And how much we hate to believe those things. They're documented. They happen. We've talked about it numerous times. That's how we read about people that are in jail for long periods of time for something they didn't do. And that is what happened in this case. Because it is painfully obvious that they cannot put this puzzle together because the physical evidence does not match it. As hard as we try to stretch this, the physical evidence does not match it. And we can't just overlook the science of it. We can't just say that's not important. Because that's basically what they're saying. Yeah, he told us he did it. So what, it doesn't make any sense. So what, nothing matches up with it. Doesn't matter. We're telling you this. He said he did it. What else do you need? We're from the government. We're here to help you. Dr. Fonte, this is interesting. She testified about numerous things. You know what's very interesting in this case is Shindra Roberson was shot from the waist down. 3 times. That's it. She was shot in the legs. And it hit a femoral vein. Dr. Fonte said these people can live up to 30 minutes. I think the state said 20 to 30. Mr. McAfee said 30 to 40. So I'll settle in the middle, 30 minutes. You're shot in the leg. You're conscious. You're able to think. 30 minutes. I'm not making this proof up. That's a cell phone. Within arm's reach of where Shindra Roberson was found. Within arm's reach of where Shindra Roberson was shot. 30 minutes. She was alive. Only one thing is going to prevent Shindra Roberson from picking up that phone and calling for help. That is an individual standing there with a gun pointed at her. But if an individual is standing there with a gun pointed at her, who was doing the stuff to the children? Who was holding Man by the hair? Where the beads come out. Where he gets superficial cuts on his belly. What the science would tell you is that's probably where somebody is holding him with a knife, trying to get information from somebody. Do we know that's what happened? No, I don't know. But it makes a hell of a lot of sense. Because when somebody is alive for 30 minutes and they're sitting beside a cell phone, they call for help unless somebody is preventing them from doing that. And if somebody is preventing them from doing that, they're unable to do anything else in the house. Dr. Fonte told you about the beads in the children's hair. She also, for some reason, the hairs that were on the back, Cindy Robertson, were never photographed. They were documented, they were marked. They were inside of blood, it was hair. I know what you refer to as a timestamp of the person who left them there. For some reason, the photos were never taken of that. She did confirm that the pillow was held over the face of Cedric before he was shot. Try to corroborate that with the state's theory. That there was just a quick fight between Cedric and Jesse is what they're telling you. And Jesse just started shooting. That's what they're telling you. I guess Cecil just sat there while Jesse's picking up a pillow, putting it over his face, putting the gun up to it, pulling the trigger. In cases have you ever heard where two men are fighting? A quick fight, the guy says, hang on. Let me put a pillow over your face. Hold still. The physical evidence, ladies and gentlemen, does not match. I can't say that enough times. It is that important. We can't just excuse that. We can't just say that's okay because there's 6 dead people and the government tells us that Jesse did this. It is much more consistent, and you must find beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty that it wasn't somebody else, but there's several people in that house holding a gun on these people. Somebody put the pillow over Cecil's face and shot him. That makes sense. If you can't say beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty that that is not what happened, the law mandates you must find him not guilty. You must find him not guilty. When it was our turn to put on proof, we put on Cedric Atkins. He was the knucklehead crackpot that the state talked about. That was brought down and gave information, but which was just so crazy that they didn't take a statement from him. Because he was just asking for money all the time. Which that's not documented. It sounds good when you talk about it. So Cedric got down here, and Cedric told you he had to be arrested, hiding in a vacant house to avoid testifying in this trial. You want an explanation for that? People like Doc Holliday, Willie Boyd, are still out. And as much as the state wants to say, oh, gangs, there's not that big of a deal. He's scared to death, to the point where he disobeyed a subpoena. Be hiding in a vacant house. They had to bring him down here and incarcerate him so we could put him on. He's not scared of me. He's not scared of Jesse Dotson. He's scared of what's out there. And it's still out there. He told you about a conversation he had with Cecil Dotson. There's no reason to disbelieve that. And it was corroborated by several matters. One, there was other individuals that told the police the same thing. Jesse Dotson driven off drug dealers, robbing people. Is that what Cecil Dotson did for a living? I don't know. He had a pending aggravated robbery case. We can ignore that if we want to, because it doesn't fit the state's theory. It almost looks from the crime scene pictures in this house that the people that did this were looking for something. We can justify it however we want to. But there's trash bags ripped open. Can we say beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty that that's not what happened? I don't know. We don't have to prove anything. All kinds of things could have happened in that house. But you find it kind of odd that all of the adults, except for Hollis, were shot in the leg. Two different guns. If you're sitting on a couch and the people beside you get shot with a gun in the leg, what are you going to do? You going to sit there, wait for the guy to load up his other gun? You're going to start running, fight, doing something. But it's two different guns. Was that all part of the staging? The bagging up of the bullets that were left there? It just makes no sense. Markel Vester, don't know what his phone number is. Wow, that matches the phone number that Cecil called. Although he told you. I didn't talk to Cecil. We can believe him or we cannot believe him. Why would Markel Vester lie? Well, he's tied in with Doc and Frank pretty heavy. What possible motive could he have to lie? He's the guy that was called from the crime scene and asked, did you guys do this? Don't know what the answer was, but his next question or statement was, y'all went too far. Doesn't sound like there was a denial on the other line. Y'all went too far. It was Markel Vester that called. KW. Dr. Aldridge, who has testified many times for the prosecution, for law enforcement. She talks to children. She said basically they did this wrong. The first time they questioned the child, they asked an open-ended statement what happened. The child indicated other people did it. And they continued to ask the child the same question. And eventually the child gave a different answer. Gave several different answers. But when they got the one they liked, then they started praising the child, which is affirmation. Because when you continue to ask the child the same question, they think the answer is wrong. You'll be able to judge her testimony. As to what was done and why. She listened to it. She observed the children. Final witness was Jesse Dawson. Talked about being up there for hours hanged out to a chair. That's corroborated. That's corroboration. Because it was corroborated by Deputy Director Armstrong. Yeah, that we did take him up there and handcuffed him in the chair for hours. And Jesse Dawson made a lot of really bad decisions. There's no excuse for it. There's no explaining it. When he left that house, he thought the children were dead. Should he have called somebody? Of course he should have. But as he said, I don't talk to the police, which isn't a very good answer. But in that environment in which he lives, in Memphis, that's the way it is. Should he have done something? Yes, he should. Without a doubt. But we can't take not calling somebody and equating it into committing a crime. As for being under the bed, as to what actually happened, Wouldn't you love to have the 5 hours of tape? To see that he told Armstrong this? But when you lose the tape or give it all away, said the police officers would. And the police know we're going to believe them, regardless of what they say. Because Jesse Dotson's just a poor kid. And the state has repeatedly told you he's been in prison before. That should be good enough for you, shouldn't it? It explains why he didn't call the police. If he was going to lie, he could have come up with something better than that. His emotion, I mean, there's such, when people testify in these cases, like him, there's really no protocol. Sat up there and testified, he didn't cry. People said, well, he's cold-hearted, he didn't cry. And if he shows emotion, they will tell you, well, he's just crocodile tears. Kind of like when the officers told you he frowned at one point. Anything he does is going to have a negative reaction to him. If he frowns, if he laughs, if he smiles, if he cries, if he doesn't cry, whatever it is, you're going to say that's the wrong thing. Can you believe that he's crying? Can you believe that he's not crying? How do you win? It's easy to throw rocks at somebody. And that's all they've done this whole trial is call him names. Point fingers at him, yell. When you hear the state's final argument, they'll be yelling. It doesn't make it any more true to stand here and yell something at you. To point fingers at him. To call him names. It's all masking the fact that the evidence does not match what the state is saying happened. That's it. It's desperation. It's just like talking about lesser included offenses. It's desperation. We talked about clear, competent, credible proof. Do you want the most important decision made in your life based on that kind of clear, competent, credible proof? Is that fair? This is the last thing I'm going to talk about. Deliberations. The verdict must represent the considered judgment of each juror. Each of you must decide the case for yourself, but do so only after an impartial consideration of the evidence with your fellow jurors. But do not surrender your honest conviction as to the weight or effect of the evidence solely because of the opinion of your fellow jurors or for the mere purpose of returning a verdict. What that means, ladies and gentlemen, is it's okay to disagree. It's okay. You guys have been here over 2 weeks. You're tired. You want to go home. I know that. But Jesse Dawson's fate's going to sit in your hands. It is okay to disagree. It is okay to hold to that judgment. Just as if you would want somebody holding that judgment for you, whatever it is. It is hard. It's hard not to say, let's just reach a verdict, because I want to get out. I want you to imagine for a minute that you are hearing a trial where Jesse Dodson is charged with driving in a vehicle. The burden of proof on the state is the same. The presumption of innocence is the same. With this type of evidence, when you weigh it, to see if the state has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, it would be very easy to find Jesse Dodson guilty. Because it's just a DUI trial. It is no different because of what he's charged with. The burdens are the same. I want you to look at it as if this proof only rose to this level and it was a DUI case. And if you would find him guilty in that, not guilty in that case, the law dictates you must find him not guilty. It's not any different, except it's much harder to do. Imagine you had two baskets. One of them had all of the evidence supporting that Jesse Dodson may have done this, and the other one had the evidence supporting he didn't do it. This basket over here would be overflowing. It only would have to have a couple pieces in there to rise to the level beyond reasonable doubt, but it's overflowing. If the burden of proof was preponderance of an evidence, just barely more one side, Jesse Dodson would win. But that's not the burden. The burden is the highest burden is known. It's just below mathematical certainty. No way. I'm done. The state's going to get another bite. They're going to scream, they're going to point. And they're going to make some good points. When you're back in the jury room deliberating, and a point comes up, I want you to think about it. And think about the burden on that. And whether it was something that was actually proven to you, or whether it was just something that somebody said that can't be backed up with any physical proof. The right verdict in this case is not guilty on every charge. And it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, because you don't want to do it. But the system mandates you do it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.